Welcome to the Time Talks podcast, history, politics, music, and art. I'm Chris Steele, also known as Time. This is the first episode, and it's with one of my mentors and teachers who changed my life, Jim Walsh. I was in the maintenance and landscaping department at Regis University, where we shoveled snow at all hours of the night. I was a mover, got a hernia eventually. I was working there full time, and that paid my tuition. And I was extremely grateful for that opportunity. I later got my master's and eventually started teaching at Regis University. And Jim was one of my professors there, and his ancestry is from Ireland. He was one of those teachers who didn't care. He was real. He just told it like it was. He was like no other teacher I ever had. He was working class, not pretentious, didn't have good posture, no briefcase, just a t-shirt and a deep, humble demeanor. He taught me about the School of Americas, the people's history of Denver. He's the first one to introduce me to Howard Zinn's writings and Oscar Romero, who he named his theater troupe after, the Romero Theater Troupe, which I eventually became a part of. Jim's from Pennsylvania, from a steelworkers family. He was a wrestler and so good at tossing people on the mat, he received a full ride to Duke. And this led him down a strange path that led him to Naropa University in Boulder, and eventually receiving his PhD in history from the University of Colorado Boulder. He's also the co-author of the book Irish Denver. How you doing?
Hey, Chris, how are you, brother?
Oh, I'm doing good. How are you?
I'm doing well.
Nice. Are you out in Ohio?
I'm at the U.S.-Canadian border, cycling.
Oh, wow. So you're already up there.
Yeah, upstate New York. I started in Quebec City.
I wanted to ask you first about, I saw your Facebook post, and you said you found the sacred memorial for 6,000 Irish famine refugees.
Yeah.
And where was that? Where was that at?
Yeah, so it's in Montreal. So during the famine, most of those ships sailed down the St. Lawrence River.
Okay.
And a bunch of them were quarantined at Quebec, on an island near Quebec City in the middle of the river called Grosse Isle, a tiny little island.
Mm-hmm.
There's a huge memorial because 15,000 people died on that island during that. They suffered from, they called it the ship fever. It was typhoid. Broke out on the ships. So they quarantined all the passengers, and they just died like flies on these places. It's just crazy.
And those are what they were calling coffin ships.
Coffin ships, yeah. And then a bunch of them made it all the way to Montreal. And they quarantined everyone on this little island that's kind of a peninsula on Montreal. Montreal Island is a peninsula. And they quarantined them all there, and they built they called them sheds. They were like field hospital. And 6,000 are buried in unmasked graves. Not unmarked graves, mass graves.
Wow.
They just tossed them in the earth. And then 10 years later, the workers go building a bridge. They could see the writing on the wall that these mass graves were going to be desecrated. So they put up this huge 12-foot rock and inscribed in it. You see it in the picture.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's so cool. I never even knew about that.
Yeah, and where those mass graves are is now a parking lot behind the stone.
Wow.
So it was, Canada, these are horrific places, you know, the horrors of these Irish immigrants when they arrived. Just, I have a lot of interest in that because so many of the branches of my own ancestry came during the famine,
Mm-hmm.
and they were lucky. They made it. They came into Canada first, and then they were able to survive and make their way down to the U.S.
Wow. And weren't a lot of people like boiling grass just to eat, like in those areas?
Yeah, back in Western Ireland. Yeah.
Yeah. Man.
Yeah, and I just through my DNA, I just did the DNA test. I just discovered that the Walshes came from Connemara, which was the worst hit part of the famine near Galway in the west.
Oh, wow.
That really touched me too. I did not know that.
Yeah, that goes right in with where your research has gone and your family history.
Yeah, and also with what we're trying to do up in Leadville, we looks like we're getting a big grant from the Irish government to design and put this memorial in. It's gonna be a big deal. We're gonna have the ambassador come out and maybe the governor and just commemorate this place.
Wow, and is that going to be for the large Irish immigrants who were up in Leadville?
Yeah.
Or what is the memorial?
Well, it's in the cemetery where all the unmarked graves are.
Okay. Wow.
That's where. Yeah. So the Irish government. We applied for a $40,000 grant, and we'll know by the end of the year if we got it or not.
That's great.
Yeah.
Well, that was leading to my next question was, I wonder if you could speak about Michael Mooney, maybe give a little summary of who he was and what about his life made an impact on you?
Well, he was uneducated silver miner immigrant who was thrust into the leadership role of 5,000 miners demanding more humane conditions and really civil rights was what they're asking for.
Mm-hmm.
And he was 28 years old, and he exemplified great leadership and courage and strength and vision throughout the strike. Nearly lynched by a mob. So I was just sort of taken with his story as, this. I think he exemplifies a lot of the desperation many immigrants feel today. Many working class immigrants. If they being pushed out of the country and being given dangerous jobs, and so for that reason I want him to speak to all Irish Americans. I want his story to be preserved, that we don't forget who we are. And so, I don't know if I told you, but I'm in touch with his granddaughter.
Oh yeah, is that when you found his grave in L.A.?
No, this happened recently.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I gave a talk at a genealogy society, and I told them the story of how I really want to find his descendants. And a woman there came up to me and told me that she's retired, she has a lot of time, and she'd find him for me. And she did.
Oh, wow.
She found his only living grandchild, 91 years old, Marilyn Mooney.
Oh, wow.
I know, it's just crazy. And I called her, and I've talked to her 2-3 times. And my suspicions were confirmed, Chris. The family has no idea about the history.
No way.
Yeah. No idea.
Yeah.
All they knew is that he was a miner. So I sent her the manuscript, and she read it, and she was really taken with it. She's sharing it with family, and I'll probably go out there and meet them at some point.
Wow. Can you imagine not learning about your grandfather until you were 91?
I know.
And his history. Wow.
I know, and I was even telling her stuff about her grandmother. But I need to call her again soon because it's been a while since I talked to her over the holidays, but I've been so busy. But I really need to follow that up because she's 91, but her mind is really sharp, and I just want to explore again what she knew and what she knows, and talk to her some more. And then she wants to put me in touch with her daughter, who's an activist.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, she's a homeless rights activist in San Francisco. So she has the DNA, takes after her great grandfather.
Yeah, definitely. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, on the topic of mining, I also wanted you to maybe speak more on the first Columbine massacre, the mining protest, and was it in Lafayette?
The first Columbine massacre, yes, it was in during the 1927-28 IWW strike, which was mostly concentrated in the southern mines down near Walsenburg and Trinidad, but was also involved what they called the northern coal fields, which was around Erie, Lafayette.
Mm.
And when a group of miners picketed a mine that was Gab run, some militia opened fire. There was an altercation, and they opened fire, and I think six of the strikers were killed, and they're buried up there by the Lafayette Library. And that's everyone hears about Ludlow. I think because it had such repercussions, and it involved the deaths of women and children.
Mm-hmm.
But no one knows about that massacre. No one knows about the deaths of 20 or more Irish miners in Leadville during the 1896-97 strike. It's just incredible the amount of money and energy and planning that goes into crushing workers' rights and unions.
Yeah.
In history, historically, and it's happening today with the right to work movement, and how I think the biggest factor leading to what we have today in the White House is the decline of unions. Unions were not there in the Rust Belt states to educate working class people. The role they've always played, bringing the vote.
Mm-hmm.
And so a lot of those voters were kind of ripe for the picking.
Yeah.
So,
that's a good point. And didn't the execution of Sacco and Vanzetti play into that?
yeah, that was one of the big triggers for that strike in 1927. And there were also some strikers killed in Walsenburg. The state police and armed thugs hired by the company, the F&I, were used to intimidate the strikers, harass the strikers, attack the strikers. And in my research, I've discovered the role that, in this was an IWW strike. And United Mine Workers was viewed as too conservative. But it was largely because of Sacco and Vanzetti, and also because before the strike, the only unions in town were the company unions. Rockefeller called them ERPs, employee representation plans, that he put into place after Ludlow to convince the miners that they had a real union, but of course it was a company union. And it was really gave power and entitlement to native-born English-speaking miners. What the IWW did is they empowered immigrant miners. And so the leadership of that strike in 27-28 was Greek miners, Mexican miners, immigrant miners for the most part, Italians, similar to Ludlow.
Mm-hmm.
And they forged a leadership that was multilingual and multi-ethnic. I mean, it's incredible, I think, what they were able to do. And they shut down. There was about 120 coal mines and CF&I coal mines in the state. And that strike shut down about 110 of them.
Wow.
They had great success. But in the end, it was a victory. They won small concessions, enough to kind of declare victory and go home and end the strike. But it was really the last big thing the IWW did in Colorado.
And when you're talking about the inclusiveness that the IWW did, it seemed that traditionally a lot of unions had used white supremacy to kind of form their unions, and then they would use people of color as scabs that was always separating other labor movements, and the IWW was known for being more inclusive. Can you speak more on that?
Yeah, no doubt. Their leadership, their rank and file, was, even by today's standards, incredibly diverse and inclusive, compared to the mainstream unions that really sort of reconstituted the same power structures that existed in mainstream society.
Mm-hmm.
So
that's what I liked about that movie Matewan, when they have that scene where Darth Vader or James Earl Jones comes in and he says he wants to join the union, and then a lot of those guys were really racist, and then the IWW organizer kind of just...
Union men, my ass. You want to be treated like men? You want to be treated fair? Well, you ain't men to that coal company. Your equipment, like a shovel, a gondola car, a hunk of wood brace. They'll use you till you wear out or you break down or you're buried under a slate fall, and then they'll get a new one. And they don't care what color it is or where it comes from. It doesn't matter how much coal you can load or how long your family has lived on this land. If you stand alone, you're just so much shit to those people. You think this man is your enemy? Huh? This is a worker. Any union keeps this man out ain't a union. It's a goddamn club. Now, they got you fighting white against colored, native against foreign, holler against holler. When you know there ain't but two sides of this world, them that work and them that don't. You work, they don't. That's all you got to know about the enemy.
Yeah. Well, there's a long history of that. I mean, the AFL's entire history is kind of compromising itself so that it can survive. Mm-hmm. It could be a conservative union, so the government wouldn't consider it a threat. And then the CIO had great radical roots, but during the McCarthy era, it sold out and compromised itself, joined with the AFL, and sold out its radical elements. So that's the great struggle in American history, is that any radical union is targeted. They're vilified, demonized, and they can't survive politically. They can't go up against that machine. So most the unions that survive are the ones that make themselves. They go to work for the enemy, so to speak.
Yeah, like you said, all the money that goes into breaking up unions. Like Walmart has their own, what is it, like union busting helicopter team or something that they will like fly into cities. Yeah.
Yeah, Walmart will close down entire stores before they allow a union.
Yeah.
To exist there. And that's the America we live in today. Low wage workers don't have representation. They don't have leverage at all. And it's a testament to how the American working class is so easily divided by race.
Can you speak on your new research that you've been working on? I know you've been doing research in Pueblo. Or
yeah, I've been researching that strike, and I've also been researching some of the ethnic communities down there. It's an amazing history in Pueblo. It's no mistake that the Columbus Day battle sort of moved from Denver to Pueblo. Because Pueblo has this massive community, Italian community and Latino Chicano communities. And that issue sort of pits them against each other. But Pueblo is a very working class town, and it flies in the face of a lot of the Northern Front Range, which is very white. It's a very economic machine. But when you cross from Colorado Springs to Pueblo, you've crossed a Rubicon. And you're in a different history, you're in a different culture, you're in a different time, you're in a different economy. It's just amazing to me. So I love going down there, and I'm just learning about some of those ethnic communities, the Slovenians, who they called the Bojans, the Italians, the Sicilians, the Poles, Croatians, Greeks, and all these communities live near the mill, either just on the west side of what is now I-25 or just on the south side of the mill. And so that's really interesting to me, because you don't see a lot of that in the history of the Southwest. A lot of Eastern European cultures. You see that in the Rust Belt, Detroit, Cleveland, Pittsburgh. And those identities are still very distinct in those regions. But in the Southwest, you don't see a lot of that. So Pueblo had that because of the steel mills and the coal mines. It had those very defined Eastern European subcultures. There was quite a large Japanese community, African American community, Irish Pueblo. It's just incredible that, and so I'm hoping to one day have a book about the city, the history of the city of Pueblo. I've fallen in love with it. I love going there. I go down there and hang out and do research, and just it's like a retreat for me.
That's great. I remember our Romero Troop performance there.
Oh yeah,
the Union Hall. It's one of my most memorable shows.
Yeah, and we have a couple invitations to go back this fall. It's a natural place for us to perform. You know, the people in Pueblo know what time it is.
Yeah. My next few questions are kind of about the Romero Troop. Just quickly, kind of when and why you started the Romero Troop.
Okay. Well, it started. This is our 14th year, so it started at the beginning of 2005. So February of 2005 is when it was launched, and started it because I recognized in my classrooms that traditional banking method of education. You know what that is?
Okay, that's something that Freire spoke about, right? Of filling someone up like a cup. It's not.
Yes.
It's not genuine. It doesn't work.
Yeah, and it's top down, and it assumes that students are empty vessels, empty receptacles, and it's a form of oppression. And so arts-based learning invites the world of the student to the table in such a beautiful way, and involves this educators having to be humble enough to admit they have a lot to learn from students. And so I started using theater just on an instinct, not really. I didn't know who Freire was. I didn't have any theory. I just knew I couldn't teach in that way. And I started using, I mean, a little bit of that, but that couldn't be the foundation of how I taught. So I just started using theater, and it grew and grew and grew and took off and changed my classrooms and made my, I knew it was my vocation when I started using theater. So I just got the idea of bringing Howard Zinn type history to the public through theater. I started calling former students who had performed, and here we are 14 years later.
Yeah. And when I was first in your class, the only thing that had ever gotten my attention throughout school, like I liked school, but I wasn't really activated when I was in school. I just knew I could go through the motions. The only thing that got me into it was hip-hop music, or if I was able to write a verse or a poem for a class. And then when I was in your class, though, I feel like you really just woke me up to this reality of history that the only thing that ever had before was hip-hop music. When I heard hip-hop rappers speak about, like Dead Prez, when they spoke about Nat Turner, and I asked my teacher in high school, who's Nat Turner? And my teacher said, there is no Nat Turner. And then when I was like, no, wait, there is a Nat Turner, I was learning all this stuff from hip-hop. That's what really got me interested in history. And it wasn't until I saw you again that everything came together when I had you in the class.
You know, I'll never forget that piece you did in the Oriental Theater before one of our shows. You had images, and it was the most beautiful display of people's history through rap I had ever heard.
Oh, thank you. I wonder if it was a song about Hurricane Katrina, or
Maybe.
one about, there's one called Capital Vision that's just a battle rap between all the brands fighting each other until the world dies of economic, environmental collapse.
Yeah, the arts it's enduring, and it wakes people from their stupor. So every educator, I don't care what discipline you teach, needs to be using the arts.
My next question was going to be, what is your teaching philosophy? Is it pretty much, I think you expanded into that.
My teaching philosophy is, if you would rather move on to the next subject before you would listen to your students' ideas, then you're not an educator. Educators listen more than they talk. They don't go into a class with a tightly structured presentation. They're like jazz musicians. They improvise as the class goes. They let the students drive the bus.
They have dialogue.
Dialogue, yeah.
Let the spirit move them.
Yeah. Which is I know how you teach, and I want to help get you back in the classroom, Chris.
That would be cool. I love teaching, and I have to run from Scantrons though, because I always get told, why aren't you giving tests?
Oh my God. Oh my God, the Scantron.
The Scantrons are following me through
like something out of Orwell.
The dungeons of academia.
Yeah, Scantron. Just drill them with dates and hit them with a Scantron. Oh my God.
So that was my next question, actually, is how do you navigate through academia without getting homogenized into or pasteurized into this Scantron world of accreditation?
How do I keep from being compromised? Well, it almost lost me my career 9 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And I won that battle, and that battle gave me security that even though I didn't have tenure, it gave me security to do what I love doing. And then I was able to find a department that valued what I do. So
your students all vouched for you.
Yeah, I think I just got really lucky. That's what it comes down to. I just got really lucky. There just aren't homes like I've found in academia that exist, and students so rarely have an opportunity in their classrooms to truly express themselves, and but that's the best answer I can give you.
I like it.
I just got lucky, but I always tell young educators never let yourself be co-opted into that system.
Yeah.
That system that values test scores, and it's really just creating false hierarchies to it's the industrialization and corporatization of education. And
one thing I was going to say is I've actually had a lot of pushback from students who are mainly freshmen who are saying, I want more tests.
Yeah.
Or I want a vocab test. I don't want a dialogue. I don't want to think deep. I just want to
Tell me what to
stuff
do
and
and I'll
put
do
back.
it.
Yeah.
Well, that's because they've been trained. And they benefit from the system as the system is.
Mm-hmm.
And they know when the roles are changed, it threatens their role. It threatens their place in the hierarchy. So yeah, that's the greatest indication that you're really shaking things up is when entitled students come forward and say, whoa, 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 whoa.
When you haven't even taught them about McCarthyism, but they evoke it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I just have 2 more questions, and I know you already had grown up with the class analysis, but was it at Duke when you started studying class struggles, when you went there as a wrestler and labor struggles, or when did you really wake up into digging into these topics and speaking out on them?
That's a great question. I grew up with it, but I was completely blind. I didn't have a consciousness about it. Duke is the first time I developed a consciousness, but it wasn't a critical consciousness. It was more of a suffering consciousness. I was miserable there, and I didn't know why. And in reflection, I know why. But it shifted me through suffering. And then when I left the place, that's when I began to see and left behind the East Coast, I began to see the role of class in my life. And that's when it just all fell into place. And as an educator, that's my radar. I'm always looking for those students who come from low-income backgrounds who are very uncomfortable in a college setting.
That's how I met you.
Yeah, I know. Well, that's what I do, Chris. I just find them like diamonds in the rough. They're usually quiet, not always, but they're usually quiet.
I was very uncomfortable in the college classroom. I was a student that I would hate now as a teacher. One who doesn't talk, but I feel paralyzed in a lot of college classrooms.
Yeah. Well, and that's the other thing is the language we have dialogue in class in a college setting is an oppressive language too. Mm-hmm. It's an entitled language. There's a book called it's called Literacy with an Attitude.
Oh yeah.
Patrick Finn. I encourage you to read it. He says
I did read that actually.
Maybe
a couple months after you told me. Yeah, I love that book.
Yeah, and he says that college setting, the language is very explicit. Everything's explicit, expectations and goals. But in a working class setting, language is implicit, shared. Knowledge is shared. And the way people talk to each other is different. And so for someone to grow up with implicit language and suddenly be thrown into explicit language culture, that's shocking.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one of the points he makes, which I really appreciate.
That's deep.
Yeah.
Well, my last question was, what are some books that greatly influenced you, or books you'd recommend?
Definitely People's History of the U.S. Huge impact. Huge. A book called, it's called Sundown Towns and Lies My Teacher Told Me, both by James Lowen.
Sure.
Taught me about public history as one big lie. And Paulo Freire, Pedagogy of the Oppressed, that's still maybe the most influential book in my life book called Wretched of the Earth by Frantz Fanon.
Oh yeah.
That book really, that's the only one I saved as an undergraduate.